Hello and welcome back to the Surfer's Library, proudly presented by Hillsborough Surf Club. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legends. Aloha, my friends. I am so glad that you have joined us once again. This episode, we continue reading Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel by Michael Lear Hinson and Donna Clausen-Jost. The book is always available on Amazon.com and EndlessDreamsPublishing.com. It's a great addition to any surf library. There are so many classic photos that you're going to have a hard time finding anywhere else. Also, if you want to help support the podcast, you can do so by visiting buymeacoffee.com/The Surfer's Library to do so. It helps cover the cost of podcasting platform fees needed to get the podcast out each month, so any little bit helps. Last episode, Mike had wrapped filming and was dealing with the struggles of getting Rainbow Bridge edited for release. Jimi Hendrix had just passed away, and his marriage was in crisis. As we pick up in Chapter 52, Mike, never one to stay idle, and his crew have an impulsive idea for a Christmas festival celebrating the birth of Jesus to be held in Laguna Canyon. You know the authorities are going to love this. Let's paddle out. Chapter 52. Christmas in the Canyon. While my wife returned to her former life back in New York, Johnny Gale, Star Shields, John Hawthorne, and I were hanging around the Rainbow Surfboard Factory in Laguna when, for no reason, Hawthorne blurted out, "Let's celebrate Jesus' birthday." It was fast, man. $40 was all we could scrape together to get things rolling as we smoked ourselves into a frenzy. Curtis Rainbow drew out a cool design from an idea he got from Bill Ogden on the back of a used envelope, and we headed for the printer. I swear, as soon as one set of hands let go, another took over. Very strange. It was a snowball in motion, kind of propelling itself all on its own. Curtis accosted Dion Wright on the sidewalk outside Taco Bell and showed him the handbill inviting people to come to Laguna Beach on Christmas Day. Curtis was an eccentric in Laguna who co-founded Love Animals, Don't Eat Them, a group of vegetarians who enlisted young, pretty hippie girls and fed them sprouts and psychedelics. Curtis was brilliant, but he had no common sense, scruples, or discretion. When Dion listened to him raving about getting 100,000 people onto Main Beach, he took over steering what was already in motion. The idea was to build up speed all over the country to throw a big birthday bash for Jesus Christ. He drew up another high-minded poster, printed it, and had Curtis Rainbow distribute it. Anybody who wanted to contribute something did. A Christmas card was created, a drawing of a teepee and Indians on a piece of cardboard with a tab of acid glued over a punched hole, inscribed with, "May the Great Spirit watch over you as long as the grass grows and the water flows." Once we put out the rumor, things spread like wildfire. JG asked Buddy Miles to headline the festival. That one was true. Buddy liked Laguna and came down whenever we asked. Then there was the one about the fucking Beatles. People are still whispering about the time they came to Laguna in the 60s and dropped acid with the Brotherhood and Leary. It's amazing that a rumor can still run full steam 39 years later. The concert would take place 3 days over Christmas in the middle of a clearing called Sycamore Hills, just off Laguna Canyon Road, about a half-mile east of El Toro Road. Nobody lived that far out in the canyon, so it wasn't going to bother anybody. Like clockwork, the festival chugged away and we raced to be ready by the end of December. Unfortunately, when the crew began building the stage about a week before the festival, the police showed up and tried to stop everything. They strutted around and tried to intimidate everyone with their badges and uniforms. Too many people had already set up camp, though. By this time, whole families were showing up carrying backpacks and pulling homemade carts. Campsites were thrown together with the basic necessities: food, cooking supplies, blankets, and beach chairs. Winters in California are usually pretty mild, so nobody worried about freezing to death. The police were really confused. No one was paying attention to them. "What's everybody doing here?" the officers were overheard saying. "What the fuck is everybody doing here?" they yelled. But there were way too many people. One cop got pissed and jumped up on stage, probably one of those overachievers, and yanked the mic out of the electrician's hand while he was still testing it. "Listen up, everyone," he ordered, and then waited for the feedback to stop screeching. "Everybody pack up your things and go home. This is private property. You'll be cited if you ignore this warning." The crowd went quiet and there was a long pause. Then out of nowhere, one voice broke through the silence. "Fuck you!" Everybody started laughing and booed the cop off the stage and back into his squad car. Johnny and I drove into the canyon every day. We couldn't believe the overnight construction of this small community. The building crew worked for 48 hours straight in 3 shifts and finished by setting up a life-size plastic statue of Jesus Christ on the stage. On Christmas Eve 1970, I think just about everybody on the planet under the age of 30 was in the canyon. We estimated about 20,000 in all. It was the Woodstock of Southern California. People left their cars parked as far away as Moulton Parkway, which runs next to the I-5, about 10 minutes from the canyon as the crow flies. But it's a 2-hour walk for us humans. There were so many parked cars, there weren't enough tow trucks in all of California to clear them out. For 3 days, people were either sitting in traffic or walking along El Toro and Laguna Canyon Road. It never stopped. Just goes to show you how a few dudes and some enthusiasm can shut down a whole town. The authority closed all the access roads into Laguna and tried to hold back the pilgrims. One guy dropped in by parachute. Someone said it was Tim Leary. Another rumor. They screened every single person who wanted through, however. If you looked even remotely suspicious, you were frisked. If you didn't look suspicious, you were frisked. There were screening stations at every entrance to the city. And then, when you reached the canyon, you had to go through another checkpoint. It was crazy, but we still managed to slither in and out. The cops really had their shields up. Just in case things got out of control, they organized the SWAT team up at Geyer Field, next to the high school, along with neighboring police departments, helicopters, even tanks. I drove up from La Jolla all 3 days and went through every single barrier and blockade. When I finally got through on Christmas Eve, it was completely packed in. It kind of reminded me of the center of Calcutta, where I saw everybody on the planet standing in one intersection. I stood on the corner of El Toro Road and Laguna Canyon. In front of a crowd of people waiting to cross the street, a motorcade of Hare Krishnas cut in front of us. There must have been 5 or 6 in each car. I wasn't sure. All you could really see was a blur of orange sheets. Passing by with their windows rolled down, the Krishnas waved at us like they were the goddamn Pope or something. Just to piss them off, I reached into my pocket and tossed 10 doses of orange sunshine right into the open window of one of the cars. I swear, not one single tab fell on the ground. It was so perfect. The scene at the festival was wild. Local Laguna band Wildfire rocked out while women walked around in crocheted bikini tops and hip huggers, drinking beer and getting stoned. Booths lined up around the outskirts of the clearing with first aid stations and drinking water. There were also people selling everything from bags of granola to puka shell necklaces. A guy with long frizzy hair sold fruit smoothies, while a woman covered in colored tapestries shook a tambourine and danced around the crowd to the sounds of Alicia Corey and the Jimmy Parks Group. There was even a guy that reminded me of Johnny Griggs. Boy, would he have had a good time at the festival. I loved it all. Christmas Day was the best. Just as the sun began to set, a helicopter came up over the hill and buzzed the entire crowd, stunning everyone on the ground. People thought it was a police chopper at first. Then, before anyone had a chance to figure out what was actually happening, we were showered with 4,000 cards with tabs of acid. We knew ahead of time it would be physically impossible to hand out LSD to everyone at the festival, especially because of the risk involved. So a friend who owned a helicopter business offered to help us out. It was amazing when the cards started hitting the ground and everyone realized what it was. I knew exactly how the pilot felt up there in the sky. It was just like when I showered my friends with the milk bottle caps, a sea of smiling faces jumping up and down. In that instance, he was their hero. How classic. The scene was depressing the last day of the festival. Nobody wanted to go home. If they'd have kept the music going, it could have gone on indefinitely. Johnny and I hung around until almost everyone left. It was such a success and definitely worth the chaos. Unfortunately, one person died, but 3 or 4 babies were born, and everyone who took part agreed that there was a transcendental feeling of blessedness about the event. Chapter 53. Living the Rainbow. Chuck finished editing Rainbow Bridge at the beginning of 1971, just about the same time that confusion over the rights to the film reared its ugly head. At one point, Warner Brothers threatened to pull funding altogether. To protect everyone involved, Chuck made 3 extra copies of the film and had them mysteriously disappear. Then Chuck went into promotion mode. First, he visited KPRI-FM to do a PSA announcement, then screened the film on January 8, 1971, at the Aquarius Theater on Sunset Boulevard. The same day, Elliot Mintz, a DJ at local KLOS radio station and future publicist for John Lennon and Yoko Ono, took out an ad in the paper praising the film. In fact, mixed reviews were splashed on front pages all over the country. Variety. In one of the more exotic and oblique film financing deals to surface so far, Warner Brothers Reprise Records is underwriting a quasi-underground film, Rainbow Bridge, to be released by the parent WB Film Company. Herald Examiner. The surfing sequences are breathtaking, but the ace up the sleeve and the only real drawing power is a mini concert and brief intimate high rap session with the late Jimi Hendrix. Los Angeles Times. Story-wise, Rainbow Bridge follows super thin, super cool, super groovy Pat Hartley. Of the generation that does not care, Hartley, as everyone calls her, cruises the strip, making a lot of V signs and bad-mouthing cops and Jesus freaks. Hollywood Reporter. What Rainbow Bridge had going for it in the face of such handicaps was its director, bright, young, articulate Chuck Wine, who was also its VP in charge of creative production for Antacarana Productions, the modest independent company that brought the project in on close to $1 million of Warner's Reprise front money. LA Free Press. Make no mistake, the film is sincere and does not seem to have been conceived or executed with any exploitive motivation. The Staff. Rainbow Bridge is a film, or to be exact, a few thousand light years of information packaged and dropped to earth cinematically with Jimi Hendrix at the guidance system. The Santa Barbara City College, The Channels. The movie is incredibly dynamic. The film goes through many different realities and makes one aware of the multi-million consciences inhabiting the earth. The Arts and Sciences from New York City Community College. This movie definitely has a lot to say. Go and see it real soon and dig on this far-out vibed flick. There was also an article in the August 15, 1971 issue of Rolling Stone magazine, thanks to Jimmy. The same issue featured an article about Jim Morrison's overdose. Chapter 54. The Renaissance. Post-production of the movie was full on. I was running on empty most of the time, but even with all the rushing back and forth to LA, it was killing me not knowing what my wife was up to. When Lance finished the mural in the spring of 1971, I picked him up from the airport. Sure, I liked helping a friend out, but I had an ulterior motive. Before he even left for New York, I asked him to keep an eye on Melinda. Now, Lance is a pretty good guy, and I think he only did it because he felt bad about the whole situation. I didn't really want him to take sides. I just needed to hear the truth. So when he got in the car at the San Diego airport, I could tell by the look on his face that it wasn't good news. Both Lance and Melinda worked in Jimmy's Electric Lady recording studio at 52 West 8th Street in Greenwich Village. He holed up in a loft on 4th Avenue across from the Cooper Union building. Working day and night, he was in and out of the studio on a regular basis. Melinda showed up around the same time as Chuck when he came to town to add the soundtrack to Rainbow Bridge. She was in charge of decorating 2 of the upstairs offices. Just like the loft in our house on High Avenue, she used tapestry bedspreads, fabric lanterns, madras pillows, and drapes that hung from the ceiling. That only took a couple of weeks, though. Then she was done. Instead of coming home, for some reason she decided to stay on in New York. We all ran in the same crowd, says Lance. Jeffrey, Melinda, Chuck, and some of the guys at the recording studio. When I wasn't working, we'd hang out around town. We were always doing something. Thanks to freebie backstage passes from the studio, we danced right up in front of the stage in Madison Square Garden at the James Taylor and Carole King concert, then slipped behind the curtain to hang out with the VIPs. We had complete access. During the day, Michael Jeffrey was extremely busy. It obviously wasn't the time to bother him. But in the evening, when he came out of his office, we'd share a meal at the Japanese restaurant across the street, then hop into a couple of cabs and meet up at the Hippo on 54th and Lexington. Jerry Steckel, Jimmy's roadie in the gang, Devin Wilson, a.k.a. Dolly Dagger, and her entourage of premier groupies. Those girls were extremely organized, basically hustlers. Rock groups like Traffic would come in and they would literally swoop down and scoop them up. The Loft, Studio 54, the Copacabana, and the Hippopotamus were a few of the first New York discos in 1971. The Hippo was classy, dinner, music, and a light show. Melinda didn't hang out at the Hippo very often. She, Chuck, and sometimes Barry DePendergrast were more into going to Max's Kansas City, where Chuck's friend Andy Warhol held court. Down at the other end of 8th Avenue, Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground played the Electric Circus, and there was always something happening at the Fillmore East, but too many needle freaks hanging around the psychedelic shops. It was Haight Street, revisited and revisited and revisited, not like the beautiful, harmonious people at the Fillmore West in San Francisco. After Chuck finished adding Jimmy's songs to the film, he found a theater to show rough footage of Rainbow Bridge for one night only. 30 of us crammed in to watch the movie for the first time. Sometimes it was more fun just to hang around the studio. Always someone interesting in or out of the door, that's for sure. New Yorkers come out in shifts. Early morning, service trucks dashing up and down the streets, deliveries, milkmen. 7 to 9, sidewalks fill with people hailing cabs and walking to work, same crowd at lunch. In broad daylight, you could literally watch somebody break into a car with no police for blocks. Shoppers out and about after 5. It's hysterical. Nobody talks to each other on the street in the city. They just grip their pocketbooks as tight as they can and look straight ahead like they're in a trance. Around 7 p.m., the dinner crowd emerges. Whatever you're hungry for, New York has it. Then, after midnight is when things get real gamey. Transvestites, semi-humans, whatever you want to call them, come out from the cracks in the sidewalk. Inside the studio was magical, adds Lance. Definitely different personalities who just happened to also be famous musicians. Eddie Kramer produced Carly Simon's debut album at Electric Lady. Carly would enter the studio surrounded by her entourage and make a beeline for the recording booth. She wouldn't talk to anybody. Typical New Yorker. Don't even think about penetrating that bubble that surrounded her. The other bands were a lot more approachable. Sitting around with groups like the Ghetto Fighters, Mandrill, and even Santana, you could have a 10-minute conversation with Carlos while he kept the hired-by-the-hour orchestra waiting. We're talking $5,000 an hour. With the good came the bad, though. Devin Wilson and her groupies regularly wormed their way in. Feather boas and all, Devin always made a scene. She was one pushy broad. Deering Howe, the group's resident millionaire and heir to the John Deere tractor fortune, also came around. Deering was a friend of Jimmy's and Linda Eastman McCartney's. Tall, thin, and good-looking, no ego. You could tell he grew up with money. It wasn't like he hung out at the studio all the time, but when he did, he was definitely with Melinda. On the weekends, everybody met at the studio, Deering and Melinda included. Then we'd all pile into a limo and drive up to Michael Jeffrey's country estate at Woodstock. Nice place, lots of fun. We'd sit around being served by a proper English butler and maid and watch videos of Jimmy in the early days playing backup on Peppermint Twist with Joey D and the Starlighters. Being in such close quarters, I couldn't help but see that Deering was a decent guy. I still kept my distance. I didn't feel comfortable seeing them together. After all, it hadn't even been a year since I went to Mike and Melinda's wedding. On the way home from the airport, I invited Lance to stay at my house. I told him he could repay me for getting him the mural by painting my meditation room in his own wild DMT style. He really had talent, man. Truth was, after getting the wind knocked out of me, I really just wanted the company. Before Lance even got settled in, we got a call from JG. He wanted us to meet him the next day. He wasn't calling from jail, I know that. It sounded more like he was hiding out. There was no other explanation. He just said, "Be there." I drove like a madman up the I-5. Taking my anger out on the road, I made an hour drive in 45 minutes flat. Lance had to practically pry his grip off the door handle. I love freaking people out. Pulling into South Laguna, JG was at some house I'd never been to before. Didn't care. He never asked questions when it came to the Brotherhood. The minute we set foot in the door, JG fired up a hookah with the most outrageous hash I've ever smoked. His house had just been busted, but all he talked about was what we were smoking, going into great detail about the distinct differences between the 3 different kinds of primo hashish. If he was trying to help me get over Melinda, he was doing a good job of it. We practically had to drag it out of JG how it all came down the night before. He explained that the cops got a tip that our latest shipment of rainbow surfboards were filled with LSD. They didn't care if they were right or wrong. It gave them just the excuse they were looking for to bust JG. Laughing his ass off, Johnny said he slipped out the bathroom window when the cops barged in his door. Everyone knows most houses in Laguna are tiny. 10 steps in any direction and you're out on the street. Luckily, JG got away. He ran up the hillside of Canyon Acres and hunkered down in the bushes. The cops were swarming below. This was some serious shit. They rousted every house in the neighborhood, and when they came up empty-handed, they started combing the hills. JG was no average guy. He was the head of the Brotherhood. Just like Purcell, Laguna PD had been waiting a long time, only now JG was the man. Scanning the bushes, a cop walked along the top of the hill with his flashlight and spotted a man laying face down in the grass. To the cop, it was just another transient. God knows bums and hippies have been living in the hills and caves in the canyon as far back as I can remember. Not knowing who he was or if he was dead or just asleep, the cop kicked the guy on the foot a few times until he lifted his head up off the ground and squinted into the flashlight. The cop barked, "We just busted a house down on Woodland and we're looking for a guy named John Gale. Do you know him?" JG felt pretty proud of himself for pulling off the old sleeping in the bushes trick. He sat up, stretched his arms, rubbed his eyes, then told the cop he didn't know what he was talking about. The cop believed him, probably just some drunk sleeping off a bender, but he told JG he still had to go down the hill to get checked out. The cop was close behind. Hiking down a canyon trail in the middle of the night was no easy task. JG got a few steps ahead. He had dressed light and was wearing moccasins. All that equipment hanging off the cop's belt bogged him down. I'm sure his regulation Oxfords didn't help either. JG was getting some real yardage on the poor guy. He just couldn't keep up. Then, waiting for the right moment, JG suddenly darted off a side trail. He heard the cop yell at him to slow down, but it was too late. He was gone in a flash. JG made his way off the beaten path, across the backside of Woodland, past Andy Wing's studio, and met up with some of the Smalls. The Smalls were local boys, some children of the Brotherhood, others just friends, ranging anywhere from 10 to 13 years old. Cruising the neighborhood, these innocent-looking kids knew everything that was going on. They were the eyes and ears of the canyon and did whatever they had to do to protect their families. "Bring some joints and meet me up on the hill across the canyon," he told the Smalls. Enjoying the show from high up above the crime scene, JG and the boys smoked and laughed at the frustrated cops taking to the hills with monster arc lamps. Even though our shipment of rainbow surfboards was confiscated, JG never went to jail for the bust. He planned things out ahead of time for situations like this, like his escape route and putting the lease on his house in a fictitious name. It all paid off. They didn't catch him in the house at the time of the bust, so they couldn't charge him with a thing. Curtis Hesselgrave and I drove up to Laguna the next day to pick up the boards and were sent to the PD warehouse. If I hadn't done that, Rainbow Surfboards would have been out of business. History. They had our entire inventory. But seriously, there was nothing in the boards. Just because the original Rainbow Surfboard stickers had the Brother of Eternal Love's name on the logo, the cops were convinced we stashed acid inside. Walking into the warehouse, the police waited for our reaction when we saw our quiver of boards laid out on the floor, the Indian rugs that were sitting on top of the boards in JG's garage, and the stash of LSD undetected inside the rugs. Somehow, we lucked out and the PD released the boards. However, 2 months later, the cops showed up at Hawthorne's house down in Leucadia. They found the surfboards in his basement and took axes and hammers to them, still convinced they'd find our stash. Again, they found nothing and left us with a worthless pile of foam and fiberglass. Coincidentally, the morning we met with JG, President Nixon picked up the local newspaper and read the story about the drug house getting busted in the canyon. In a statement to the press, he publicly declared Laguna Beach as the drug capital of the world. Chapter 55. Hollywood. The Hollywood premiere of Rainbow Bridge was held at Greystone, a mansion the American Film Institute leased in Beverly Hills. Warner Brothers was literally chomping at the bit to strut their stuff to the Hollywood bigwigs. They wanted a big pat on the back for one reason only: to recoup their investment. This was one of the few times they helped us out since before Jimmy's death. 2 strobe lights swept across the black starry sky above the huge Spanish estate built in the 1920s. Led past a stone fountain, guests were directed onto a massive patio in the back. So much controversy had been brewing about Rainbow Bridge over the past year, good and bad. The place was packed with beautiful people. Chuck Wine was the center of attention wearing the same blue velvet cape he wore to Jimmy's funeral. He deserved all the praise. His neighbor, Don Johnson, was invited. So were some of the Monkees and their manager. Keith Allison of Paul Revere and the Raiders was also there, as well as Sal Mineo, David Nueva, and Mickey Dora. When I turned around, there she was, standing alone in the middle of the patio, looking up at us with a big smile on her face. You don't even know how good that made me feel. She actually looked happy to see me. Remember, I hadn't seen my wife since she took off for New York almost a year earlier. When Michael and Johnny walked out onto the patio, they were trailed by 4 beautiful young women who looked like fairies with flowers in their hair, remembers Melinda. My 2 best friends were dressed in velvet jackets and capes, tie-dye shirts, tropical flowers, and carried a hookah pipe. The group was a remarkable sight, almost angelic. As they walked down the hand-carved steps, all I could think of was how great it was to see the 2 of them. Johnny and Michael truly put a smile on my face. Deering spotted a couple of friends across the patio, so the 3 of us didn't waste a minute catching up on the past 10 months. Unfortunately, Melinda didn't come by herself. She flew into LA with her close friend, Deering Howe. After everything I'd gone through during the whole separation, I didn't really care about him anymore or any of that crap. She was so beautiful in her velvet rainbow pants and beaded Indian boots. I was just happy to see her. Johnny and I went to the Warner Brothers premiere for one reason: to get Melinda back. I missed her and wanted her home. Instead of dragging her off kicking and screaming, JG and I came up with a better plan. As the patio emptied into the theater, very casually, JG pulled out a Visine bottle and squirted it up into the air. All of a sudden, I felt a mist on my skin, recalls Melinda. I looked up at the sky to see if it was sprinkling, but just as quickly I forgot about it and jumped back into the conversation. When the movie showing was announced, Deering and I followed the other guests into the theater and I settled in. I laid my hand on the armrest, ready to see our dream come to life, and I watched my arm melt into the upholstery. Melinda didn't have a clue what was happening to her. She lost track of time and space altogether. She never caught on that JG showered her with liquid LSD. She didn't even mind leaving Deering alone in the theater. 3 days later, says Melinda, I woke up at Johnny's house in Laguna. I tried to get a hold of Deering, but by the time I called the Beverly Hills Hotel, he had already checked out. I never heard from him again. I felt terrible. Sweet Deering. He was a wonderful addition to my life, and I'll always have a great love for him in my heart. But I ended up back with Michael at the beach. Chapter 56. Premiere at the Cove. During all the hassles with Warner Brothers and their ridiculous demands, Chuck and Barry pilfered 3 copies of the 35mm film. Chuck waited patiently until after the AFI showing, then put his plan into gear for the missing reels of film. I mean, what else was he supposed to do? Warner Brothers was holding all the cards. Because Chuck had a lot of time invested, 3 years to be exact, this was the only idea he could come up with to get the movie out to the public and make some cash. Barry headed east. Chuck stashed his copy, and he gave the last one to Melinda and I. The plan was to go underground and rent out theaters at midnight. Melinda's friend, Spence Wilson, owned the La Jolla Cove Theater on Girard Avenue. The 650-seat movie house had been a fixture in La Jolla since 1948, showing mainstream and foreign films. Spence rented the theater to us after midnight in the middle of July, and we hired our own projectionist. We also designed a poster announcing Jimi Hendrix' Rainbow Bridge movie at midnight. And around 3 in the afternoon on the day of the screening, we sent George Borlowski and some of the other Wind-N-See Grummies around town and down to the beach to pass out 400 flyers. All the Groms hung around Melinda and I, including George and his brothers, who lived across the street from Wind-N-See. He had the best view of the lefts from his bedroom window. 9 hours after we sent the kids out, Melinda and I walked across the 3 blocks to the theater, and when we came around the corner onto Prospect, it blew our minds. There was a line of people that led all the way to the Cove. Man, were we stoked. We never expected that much of a turnout. What a trip. At 12 o'clock midnight, the theater emptied out from the last regularly scheduled show, and the long line waiting to see Hendrix up on the 20-foot-high screen filed in. There were so many people, there weren't enough seats to hold everybody. Some sat 2 to a chair, Others dropped right in the aisles. The house lights went down. The room went silent. Haleakala Paniolos rode horseback through the hills above Paea, and Hawaiian music blared loudly throughout the theater. Then, all of a sudden, Jimmy's electric guitar blasted out of the speakers, and I popped up on the big screen in a long robe. The Rainbow Bridge experience began. The next day, one of the reviews in the local paper quoted Spence Wilson saying, "I didn't understand it, but it really made me feel good." We knew we had something. The weekend of August 4th was JG's birthday. Our present to him was to show it at the Laguna Theater and give JG all the tickets. He had 2 days to hand them out. To spruce the theater up, we stood 6 airbrushed rainbow surfboard prototypes outside the doors and put another 6 on stage. I swear, people were crammed in there like sardines. Word about the movie reached Laguna as soon as we showed it in La Jolla, and when it got to the part where Les and I were smoking it and cutting open the surfboard, everybody in the theater lit up. Man, I never saw so many joints going off in one room at the same time. A thick cloud of smoke completely filled the theater and you could hardly see the screen. Needless to say, the manager flipped out and didn't offer to show the movie again. We took Rainbow Bridge on the road after that. Unfortunately, our reputation preceded us wherever we went. The film ran only one night in Tucson because the crowd smoked themselves out. The local papers published articles that read, "There's an outrageous marijuana fest happening tonight at the Bijou, so keep your children safe at home. It should be a bust." The next day, the free publicity pretty much ran us out of town. The media and the law were always right on our tail, and every showing across the country was a one-night engagement. Rainbow Bridge played a few more times, including the Vogue next to Musso Frank's in Hollywood, and a year later it screened at Fox Village. Although most of the cast and crew showed up, along with a few of the producers and other big shots, I always felt our most successful screening was at the Cove in La Jolla. Chapter 57. The Arm of the Law. At the beginning of the 70s, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love was starting to collapse. Over 35 million doses of orange sunshine had been produced and distributed, and by the end of the decade, they were worth millions. Normally, that's a damn good run, but there's always a price to pay when you break the law. The cops were constantly on them and anyone associated with the Brotherhood. Loitering, forgetting to use their signal on a right-hand turn, they picked people off like birds on a wire. The arm of the law even extended as far down as acquaintances of friends of the Brotherhood. Like the time Haley, John Hawthorne, a kid named Daryl, and I drove back from Windansea. I had just turned right onto Laguna Canyon Road when Purcell and his partner showed up on my ass in an unmarked police car and forced us to stop in front of the festival grounds. I already had zero respect for the guy because of the way he harassed my friends and me over the years, so I really gave him shit whenever I had the chance. That's one kind of karma. Stopping smack dab in the middle of a crosswalk full of tourists coming out of the festival arts grounds, Purcell and Romaine started rummaging through our truck. Weren't those two guys burnt out after all these years of hiding in trees and stalking people? I guess they really enjoyed rousting hippies and surfers. I swear, you should have seen Purcell. He was walking around with his chest all puffed out. He was the man in charge, and he wasn't going to let you forget it. After the Leary bust a couple of years back, he had a reputation to uphold. I'd had enough. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. It's pretty bad when you can't even drive through Laguna without getting stopped because you look like you're carrying drugs. Talk about judging a book by its cover. Just then, I jumped out of the truck and started running around in circles. I figured the only way I was going to get out of this one was to take immediate action. So I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Stop them! They're robbing us! They're robbers!" Not knowing what was going on, people on the sidewalk stopped dead in their tracks. Remember, Purcell and Romaine were undercover. Now, I don't know what tourists expected, but they obviously bought my act and started whispering and pointing at our attackers. It really didn't look good. Yelling for help created such a spectacle that Purcell finally told us to get the hell out of there. When word got out that cops were coming down on the Brotherhood, everyone started scattering. Those who didn't split were either arrested or turned on each other. Ronald Stark's lawyer got a visit from the IRS. They agreed to meet with him and Stark in Washington, D.C., but Stark disappeared with a large share of the Brotherhood's money. Leary broke out of the California men's colony in San Luis Obispo, fled the country, and was taken hostage for almost a year by Eldridge Cleaver. He escaped again, this time from Algiers, and laid low in Switzerland until he could get back into the country. Billy Hitchcock was convicted of stock fraud and turned state's evidence against Tim Scully and Nick Sand for selling LSD internationally. He finally admitted he was involved with the Brotherhood and got a 5-year suspended sentence and paid a small fine. Sand and Scully were both convicted and found guilty of flooding the country with high-grade LSD. Scully got 20 years, Sand 15. Released on bail, waiting for his appeal, Sand disappeared. When we found out Buzzy only owned part of Rainbow Bridge and that Warner Brothers still had a claim, Michael Jeffrey promised to pay the studio off so we could own the film outright. Michael had just sold 2 restaurants in Spain and was carrying $600,000 in cash when he flew back to London on March 5, 1973. Unfortunately, when his small private plane took off, it hit a commercial airline head-on. Chapter 58. Rainbow Juice Bar. In 1972, my life was about family, surfing, and having fun. Thankfully, Melinda and I settled back in together. It's crazy how quickly you forget the little things, like that whole kidnapping episode, when you're busy. Thank God. Busy for Melinda and I meant opening up an organic sandwich and smoothie shop. We researched different types of foods and how they affect the digestive tract. Processed foods clog you up. Only natural foods contain all the vitamins the body needs. When we figured out this could really work, we called the one person who always came through for me when I needed major cash, Buzzy Bent. I swear, that guy was like my guardian angel. He was always just around the corner, revving up his Porsche, ready to lend a hand. We didn't know for sure if he would come through, so Melinda and I upped the ante by preparing an entire organic meal for Buzzy and the owners of the Chart House. We really did our homework. We drove up to San Francisco and down to Baja to find farmers that produced organically grown fruit. We even bought tree-ripened produce and recycled the seeds and rinds afterwards to ensure that no sprays, artificial fertilizers, or synthetics were used. I guess our passion was contagious, because with Buzzy's help, we rented a storefront on La Jolla Boulevard in Nautilus, just up the street from Windansea, and opened the Rainbow Juice Bar. Not only did we want to blow our customers away with our smoothies and sandwiches, we wanted them to have a complete visual experience as well. So Buzzy hooked us up with Ken Kellogg, the interior designer for the Chart House, who went beyond anything we could have imagined. I swear, the inside of our juice bar looked like a ride at Disneyland, but more cosmic. It was the most amazing craftsmanship and unique surrealistic architecture. Lance added to the 3-dimensional look by painting clouds on the ceiling and a rainbow on the floor. Racks of rainbow surfboards were also set up around the store. Boards at Hobie's and Gordon & Smith were $250 to $300 at the time. I don't remember our boards ever costing less than $400, all strictly because of the quality artwork. When the interior was finished, it was like nothing I'd seen before. Definitely an e-ticket ride to Fantasyland. I swear, every square inch of that juice bar was young and fresh. George and a few of the Gremmies cut fruit and cracked macadamia nuts, and beautiful tan teenage girls worked the counter wearing crisp white Mexican wedding blouses and flowers in their hair. Because it was such a labor of love, it showed in everything on the menu. Regular customers drove down from LA on the weekends just to have a rainbow juice bar fruit salad with Bambi's mystical macadamia, coconut, and banana sauce. This wasn't something we did for the money. It was more for the adventure, our effort to enlighten the public about an organic way of life. Good thing, too, because our accountant told us we were basically paying every customer $1.50 to eat our fruit salad. Chapter 59. The Impact Zone. Mike Haley came down south from Seal Beach in the fall of '73, and on the 3rd day of his visit, a strong northwest swell showed up in California. The next morning, La Jolla Cove was breaking barely enough to surf. Seeing the lineup at La Jolla Shores, we knew that Swami's was the call. Loading our boards into my Pontiac wagon, we caught Swami's with an 8 to 10 foot swell. After surfing a session and thinking that La Jolla Shores was probably perfect by now, Haley and I jumped back into the car and headed south. Wherever we surfed back then, there were a few locals who followed us around. I guess they figured we knew where the best surf was. No big deal. But on the way up the stairs at Swami's, Haley and I decided to pull a fast one. We quietly put our boards in the car to sneak out of the parking lot. No entourage, no convoy, no such luck. As soon as my squeaking tires left the lot, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a troop of locals heading our way. The chase was on. Breaking out a joint, I drove fast up Torrey Pines Road. I always looked for the fastest line on the road. You know how you take a turn on the inside? Fuck it, Haley said, dropping the joint between his legs. He was a little slow in some ways. Being good friends, though, we didn't let anything get past ourselves. We'd call a spade and a kook a kook. Out of instinct, I reached next to Haley's lime green wetsuit to go for the joint, one of my high, smart-ass moves. I know, I should have been paying attention to the road, but that didn't really hit home until after we slammed against the wall and my right front tire blew out. I felt so bad about getting Haley into this situation that while the car was tipping on its side, I looked over at my friend and said, "I'm sorry." The car straightened itself out when the left tire popped and it came back down on all fours. Then we hit the ground, flew over the center divider into oncoming traffic and to the opposite side of the road with my foot on the brake the whole time. When we came to a stop on the shoulder of the road, I half expected to see bloodshed, but we were both okay. Confused and a little off balance, all I could think about was La Jolla Shores. I needed to get down to the beach before the swell moved on. Sitting right behind my station wagon was the car full of stunned surfers, so Haley and I yanked our boards off the racks, shoved them in the trunk of their car, and told them to head for La Jolla. I never even considered going back for my car. The impound fee for that old wagon alone, not to mention the price of 2 new tires, made it a waste of my time. When we got to the shores, it was 8 to 10 feet from a northwest high tide in sets of 6 to 8 waves. Haley was still in shock and went down to the beach to sit it out. I wasn't going to miss an opportunity no way. I grabbed my board, headed south, and took a rip current that went right outside of the surf. Once I reached outside, I just sat there motionless with my eyes closed and took a breath to slow down my beating heart. In the fall of 1973, a beautiful north swell sent deep black heavy lines into La Jolla Shores, says Warren Patch. My college friend hooted as we crested the hill on Ardeth Road because you could see whitewater beyond the La Jolla Tennis Club. Arriving at the parking lot, we saw surfers disappear into overhead tubes and come back out again. Wow! I had no idea at that time how unusual it was for the shores, but what I did know was that it was the best I'd ever seen in 4 years I had been surfing and in the 20 years since. It took a lot of effort to get out without getting pounded. I thought I was a pretty good surfer at that time, what with my backyard 6'4" swallowtail, but honestly, I was more concerned about getting caught inside of the really big sets than I was about riding them. In fact, I don't remember catching or making a single wave that day. What I do remember was that far outside of the lineup sat a lone surfer, motionless on his board, stoned. His long blonde hair and matching beard were hanging past his shoulders. So was his face. No expression. Bloodshot, vacuous eyes suggested that no one was home. Ominous stupor. I knew he was tripping somewhere far away. Weird old hippie, I thought. He's too stoned to surf. Ha! How could he even balance on his board? The biggest set of the morning arose and we all scrambled for the horizon, except for the stoned surfer who didn't seem to notice. As I dug hard to get safely over the next wave, the hippie guy was still sitting immobile on his board. Shoulders slumped, he sat facing the cresting wave, non-responsive. It started tilting him over backwards. As I paddled past him up the face of the wave, I turned back over my shoulder and screamed in his face, "Paddle, you dumb shit!" He seemed to pop awake as he looked at me curiously from the twilight zone. I'm not sure if he saw me or was looking through me, but as the wave was sucking him over the falls backwards, he slowly turned around and stood up. Morbidly grinning, I watched the whitewater waiting for his head to pop up, but it didn't. Where did he go? Drowned? A quick glance down the beach and there he was, gliding over the back of the wave in a low tube riding crouch. Then he sank back down onto his board in the same sitting slouch as when I first saw him. He didn't even have to paddle back out. The wave had deposited him down the beach nearly parallel to where he took off. Now my face was slack-jawed. Who was that? I asked my La Jolla buddy. With an embarrassed look on his face, which made me feel incredibly stupid, he cursed me in a low voice so that no one would know I was with him. "That's Mike Hinson, you asshole." And so I was formally introduced to the no-stroke takeoff. Dr. Warren Patch, Endless Childhood, The Surfer's Lifestyle. Well, this is going to conclude our reading of Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel by Michael Lear Hinson and Donna Clausen-Jost. I really hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I did reading it. I want to thank the author, Donna Clausen-Jost, for allowing me to share this incredible book with you. I had the opportunity to meet Donna and her husband Lance, yes, the same Lance that painted Jimmy's studio, at Mike's Memorial Paddle Out back in June at Windansea. Thank you, Donna, for answering all my questions, calling me about some of my mispronunciations, and even sharing some stories not included in the book. I'm hoping the next time I'm down in California, we can sit down and share some of those memories with the podcast. For the rest of you out there, don't forget that the book is always available on Amazon.com and EndlessDreamsPublishing.com. This is not the end of the season. We'll be back with another episode next week, returning to our short story format from various surf authors. Until then, keep your toes on the nose, your bottom turns tight, and your stoke high. I'll see you in the lineup. Donna Clausen-Jost is an American author and publisher whose literary journey began in 1997 with the release of a marketing guide for artists. In the process, she discovered a passion for writing that has since become both her creative outlet and personal therapy. Her most notable work is Mike Hinson, Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel, co-authored with legendary surfer Michael Lear Hinson. In the course of bringing this book to life, Jost founded Endless Dreams Publishing, gaining hands-on experience in writing, editing, layout, and book marketing. She recently published My Brush with Hendrix, the story of her artist husband, Lance Jost's experience painting a 100-foot-long mural in Jimi Hendrix's Electric Lady recording studio in Greenwich Village. Residing in South Orange County, California, she continues to write and inspire others through her storytelling.